Hello, I'm Northfield City Administrator Ben Martig. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to give a little recap of the January 7th City Council meeting. We had a full agenda, and we kicked it off really related to the closed session that we had that really wasn't open to the public in general. The City Council closed the meeting to discuss the potential purchase of property related to adding a new park in the north side of the city of Northfield. We are fortunate that the Healthy Community Initiative here in Northfield received a grant, a competitive grant across the nation, where we got the value of about $300,000 to install new playground equipment for a part of our town that's really underserved related to our park system. So in the northeast part of our community, we have a pretty large segment of people and population density that really doesn't have a safe way to get to an accessible park. And so the council's been looking at where could we possibly get some property acquired for that. So we looked at 3 different properties, discussed those in that closed session. The reason we go into closed session is ultimately that would be a negotiation that we would go into with a property owner. And just like if you were negotiating to purchase a home or something, you don't want to disclose all of the details of what you think it's valued or how you might see one or the other of more better park to serve our community. And so we closed that meeting, had some discussion. There was no action in an open meeting. If we do choose to move forward with a park, that will all have to be done in an open meeting. And there's going to be a lot more discussion of this in the future with the city that will be available to the public. But beyond that, I can't really say too many more details than that, other than we did look at a few properties. Our Parks Board will be having some discussion in January related to that issue. And I'm going to be expecting the City Council going to be coming back in January or February for sure related to further action. So more to come. That park is planned on being installed in the summer of this year. And so we're excited about the opportunity and are hopeful that we can pull some things together. Then we went into our regular meeting, and as you might see here, I'm standing in our City Council chambers, and our floor is in a little bit of rough shape right now. You can see we have a little bit of a paper covering over it. And so what we're doing right now in our City Council chambers is we're installing basically a hearing impaired audio system here, so that if you have hearing aids or that you use in our facilities here at City Hall, you'll be able to function well and you'll be able to hear and participate in our meetings. So it's going to cause a little bit of disruption, I guess, during our council meetings, maybe not as aesthetically pleasing as we like to, but we're going to be finishing up that system and getting the carpet installed here in February, so we'll have a nice fresh new meeting room. The next couple of meetings here in the council chambers, we'll be kind of living with the condition a little bit. Moving on, we did have some guests that came in and gave a presentation that often happens at our council meetings. We had Awareness Week related to human trafficking in Minnesota. So we had members of the Rotary Club of Northfield come in and talk about the issue of sexual exploitation and human trafficking that happens. And basically, it really, I think, opened the eyes to us as a community, and there's going to be further education related to this issue. It's one of the priorities of Rotary that's working on this currently. Our local club is part of that effort. You might not realize this, but as it relates to sex trafficking, Minnesota actually is not doing very well. If you look nationally, we're the 3rd highest rate of human trafficking in our entire country, and it's a real issue that we have. And so there are things that we can do to be more aware of those issues. A lot of times those that are most susceptible to human trafficking are those in poverty, those that are vulnerable, where they look at potentially being forced into these situations in order to even get daily necessity of issues, where they're looking at having uncertainty on housing or uncertainty of being able to have the next meal to feed their children. And so it's really those populations that there's the vulnerability on that. So they talked a little bit of, first of all, the awareness of the statistics, as well as the issue of sex trafficking. And so you can look forward to stay tuned here with the Rotary Club to learn more, where you out in the public can be aware of how you might observe human trafficking and how you might be able to sound alarms to law enforcement and others if you suspect that there might be human trafficking involved, because there can be a level of danger with that as well. So you certainly want to be cautious as you pass on information that you might observe. So please take a look at our council meeting and check out that full presentation to learn more about that particular issue. We did also have, as kind of our organizational meeting, our consent agenda included a lot of things like officially designating where we do our public notices as a community in our newspaper and our depositories of where we put our money in the bank. We also took action on identifying a president pro tem for 2020, and that's basically in the absence of our mayor if they're not able to attend the meeting. So if Mayor Pownell is not available, we have a number 2 person ready to step up and help out, and the council as a whole really approves who that person is. Recent history has them rotating that amongst the council members, and we are fortunate that Councilor Graybaugh was nominated and approved by the City Council to serve as President Pro Tem. So she'll be stepping in if the Mayor Pownell is unable to join us in a meeting. She'll help us run the meetings, and we know she'll do a great job helping us out in that role as well. We have a continuation this last meeting on the 7th on Tobacco 21 ordinance. So back in November, we had a lot of discussions with the City Council about considering increasing the legal age to use tobacco product, or to sell and purchase tobacco products, that is, from 18 to 21. We currently have an ordinance that outlines licensing of tobacco-related retailers in town, and it would be subject to those. So gas stations, tobacco shops, those kinds of things are impacted. And there's been over 50 communities in Minnesota, including counties and cities, that have already adopted these policies. And since our last meeting back in November, the federal government has actually taken action. So with an appropriation bill at the federal level, they tied onto that and approved through Congress a requirement that increased that age from 18 to 21 across our entire nation. For those that you have to be 21 now to be able to purchase or sell tobacco products. Now, we're not completely clear yet from the federal government when the effective date goes into effect. So initial media reports indicated it was likely summer. We've heard as late as in the fall of this year that would go into effect. And there's also been some activity that has suggested that it's effective immediately. So from a licensing standpoint at the city, we take our direction really from the state of Minnesota regulation from a licensing standpoint, and we have not received any official notification on that. So if you're out and about and in gas stations and you see signs in some places that allow for maybe has a note about you have to be 21 and maybe others don't, where it might still be 18, part of that likely is because it's not completely clear from the federal government, and we have locally not taken any action to inform our retailers because we haven't really received that direction yet. The federal law changes do not affect possession or use though, so possession and use is still regulated at the state level at 18, and so you can still possess and use tobacco products at 18 even though the sale is going to be moving up to 21. Now, do fully anticipate at this legislative session coming up in the early part of this year, in a month or so, the state of Minnesota legislature will be kicking off, and we do anticipate them taking on tobacco-related laws as a continuation from last session. But we're going to continue moving forward with our local ordinance. So getting back to Northfield's ordinance, the City Council unanimously on a 7-0 vote did approve our first reading of an ordinance to increase the sale and purchase, of tobacco from 18 to 21. Now, what does tobacco include? Well, obviously it does include things like cigarettes, but what people might not realize is that it also relates to vaping devices. So under our ordinance and state law, vaping devices are considered tobacco products. So if it is a vaping device that is used for vaping, it's classified as a tobacco product. Similarly, if you have the juice that's used in that vaping device, that's also considered a tobacco product. Right now, if you're under 18, it's actually against the law to possess or use vaping products or the liquid, whether or not there is nicotine product within that. I think that's an important piece. I'm a parent. I wasn't aware of that until recently. This is an emerging industry though, and we're starting to see some of the health impacts related to use of vaping in our communities. We've seen a dramatic increase in Minnesota, across the nation, and even here in Northfield, where we've seen dramatic increases in the use of these vaping products, which are often tied to then people moving on and using it into other tobacco and nicotine related products, which we know are very difficult to remove the addiction. So unfortunately, from a public health standpoint, we've really seen a major reversal in the trending, where we had seen a pretty dramatic decrease in the use of tobacco products in recent history, and then it had stabilized. That trend is completely changing over again, which now that there's this new technology of these vaping devices out there, governments, federal, state, and local, are all trying to react to this new product on the market, understand its health impacts, and determine how the regulation maybe has to relate to that. So getting back to our ordinance again, we are also increasing our fines to match basically how we fine retailers who have violations of these sales. So if they were to sell to someone under 21 under this new ordinance, the penalties now will be matching just like an alcohol violation. So if a retailer could sell alcohol, there will be the same type of penalties in place. So it's quite an increase from where it had been in the past, just kind of getting at the seriousness of the issue. We look at it as a controlled substance similar to alcohol, and so we really want to treat them the same. We also are increasing with this new ordinance, new education requirements and training as it relates to servers of that and retailers. So they will be mandated upon licensing, within 30 days of licensing and hiring of new people, they'll have to go through a mandated training session in order to determine, to give them the availability to sell the products to the public as well. We think that's an important component. We've been doing that with alcohol for years for compliance training. And so we'll be doing the same type of thing as it relates to this. We did have some discussions about whether we should do any restrictions on use and possession. I think where that gets tricky from a enforcement standpoint is if there's inconsistencies from our community to the next, it's a little easier to control from a purchase standpoint. However, from a use and possession standpoint, if we were to increase it to 21 and say a 19-year-old is coming through the community from another community, it's not like we post signs all over town saying you have to be 21 to be able to smoke. So we just think from a regulation standpoint at this point in time, probably makes sense, knowing the state's going to be taking this up, to advocate to them to increase that age to 21 for use and possession, and it now at the local level just to leave it related to the sale. Again, because we think from an enforcement standpoint that could really be confusing to people. And if we did issue tickets, we think it would be hard also from a justification standpoint. We would have to have some burden of effort to say, how are you informing people so they know this law exists? So I think for now we're holding off on any changes related to that. One of the other issues that we talked about was there are a lot of new flavors on the market that never used to exist many years ago. So these new vaping devices have things like bubblegum flavor, fruit flavors that have been really what we believe have been marketed more directly to youth. There is some indication that at the federal level, they're going to be placing restrictions on those types of flavorings. We also expect the state to be doing that. We don't typically do a lot of enforcements of products at the city level. So if it's illegal to be on the shelves, we think it does create some challenges from an enforcement standpoint as it relates to trying to determine what flavors are allowed or not. So right now, our city ordinance does not have any flavor restrictions. We can come back later and amend that later. We are going to be bringing forward to the council a consideration of placing further restrictions on flavoring at the state level from a legislative advocacy standpoint at the end of January. But for now, there are no flavor restrictions. So what's next related to Tobacco 21 in Northfield? We did have also, as a side note, school officials talking about the issues that they're seeing in our schools. They've been ramping up education and enforcement within their communities as well, as they had seen a rapid change. The reaction to that, they said parents are becoming more informed, students are becoming more informed, and they also are seeing anecdotally less usage in our schools as it relates to those efforts. But they also supported the ordinance going forward. So in order for an ordinance to pass at the city, it did pass at that first reading, as I said earlier. It'll be moving on to the second reading that's scheduled for January 21st. I anticipate that will be on what's called our consent agenda. That's more of an administrative function. So I expect that will pass on January 21st, but it is scheduled up again for that date. And then we have a period of time where we have to do a publication. So basically 30 days after that, it will go into effect. So assuming there isn't more information from the federal government that will preempt the restriction of sale to those 21 and under before that date, we're looking at the end of February for the effective date of our ordinance related to that. So I should say a thank you to our board and commission members that worked on this. We have the Northfield Alliance for Substance Abuse Prevention, Northfield ASAP, that helped us out with the background research, Katie Reed with HCI and the chemical coordinator related to the mental health coordinator also helped work on that issue. So we thank you to Katie. We had Tracy Ackman Shaw with Rice County Public Health helping out on the development of the ordinance, our city attorney, our police chief Monty Nelson, our city clerk Deb Little. Many people were involved in this, a lot of work put together on our ordinance, and thank them for their work on that, and more to come on that. But please, if you want to learn more, there's a lot of information out there about the health risks and the changing laws that are happening related to vaping in our community. So please be educated, particularly if you are a parent out there in our community. It's a real issue that our youth are facing. Moving along, we did have a continuation of action related to our 2020 street project. So there are two different actions related to those projects this last council meeting on January 7th. First of all, our mill and overlay project, that the primary areas are included kind of up in the Carlton neighborhood area that we have of the community. The action we took on Tuesday night, there was approval on a 6-to-1 vote of the City Council to move ahead with the improvement. Basically, that action means that we are committed to doing a project. It'll include certain designated streets within that area, and will include a mill and overlay with corrections to the storm sewer system. Our curbs will be repaired. Basically, a mill and overlay is you're keeping the main structure of the sub-base material of the roadway and the base layer of the asphalt of the roadway surface, but you take off the top layer of it and place a new one down. This is a kind of a practice of maintenance that we do on our roadway system, and it really extends the life of roadways, which can be very expensive. This particular road in that neighborhood is really towards the end of its useful life. This is going to give us another good 15 years left in the road surface of that before we'll have to come in and do likely a new reconstruction in the future at some point in time. So we're working on that. There are a lot of interests related to issues of adding bike lanes, adding some pedestrian safety enhancements like curb extensions to narrow the street crossings for pedestrians in certain areas. And potential parking impacts related to some of those issues. Those are still getting worked out. We're gonna have a work session on Tuesday for the City Council related to that issue. And then on January 21st, we're scheduled to have action on approving final designs and specifications and to go out for bid on that project. It's important that we keep this project moving along, because if we get the bid out early this year, we think we can get some good competitive bids from multiple contractors. If we delay it too long, though, we've seen some cases. Last year, we actually didn't get any bids the first time we went out on a particular project. That caused delay, increased cost to us, so that impacts us as a community. We certainly don't want those added costs. The other issues, we did call for a hearing as it relates to the Jeff Parkway and 246 intersection project. And so we'll be having a public hearing related to the financing of that project, and we're looking forward to moving that along. Much more to come on that issue. In the summer of 2020, we'll be doing construction on that particular project. The last thing I want to comment on is hopefully you've had a chance that if you're a resident of Northfield, you've received a letter in the mail from Fieldstone Research. We're doing some surveying around parks investments in the community. We're going to be having a work session next week related to getting feedback on that survey and having some discussions with the City Council about whether they might want to pursue a local option sales tax authorization from the state of Minnesota to implement a 0.5% sales and use tax. So things like clothing, groceries would not be taxed. It would be basically anything in the state of Minnesota that was taxed now. There'd be an additional 0.5% locally that could be used for parks and recreation investments. We know as a community, we've from many years ago, due to some budget cuts at the state level, the city scaled back some of its funding towards parks maintenance, and we haven't been able to recover from those investments yet to this point. So we are levying property taxes for some park maintenance improvements, but we know there are a lot of needs out there that are going unmet based on users and feedback that we got. So this survey will help further inform us. It'll be another tool for us to consider in our policy discussion. The one thing about sales tax that is also a benefit from a community, Northfield is a destination community for visitors, tourism, and so the spending that happens in our community often happens from people that don't live here. It is a way for us to capture some additional revenue from people who are visiting and spending money in our community that we can capture that could be used back again. But again, that will be a further council discussion to see if they want to use that tool, and if so, what types of projects might they want to use that on. So more to come on that. If it were to move forward with that local sales tax, it does ultimately require voter approval here in Northfield. So registered voters this November, if the council chose to move ahead, would have to ultimately pass it by a majority approval in order for that to move ahead. So more to come on that. Encourage you to pay attention. But that kind of wraps up our meeting. We got a full agenda next week, again, on our work session. We don't take public testimony in our work session. The council rolls up their sleeves and kind of goes through some projects. We'll be talking about the 2020 street projects. We'll be talking about that local option sales tax and potentially park investments. And lastly, we'll be getting some updates on our strategic plan. We're in our third year of our 3-year strategic plan. We'll be kicking off a new one in 2021, but for now, I'll be giving a little bit of an update on that. So with that, that's an update on the January 7th City Council meeting. Thank you for watching. I'm your City Administrator, Ben Marte.